Our preview for the 2025 Minnesota Vikings. Their offense in 60 seconds. Their offseason in 60 seconds. I already got a little bit ahead of myself, moving too fast. Signed Will Fries, 5 years, $88 million, $44 guaranteed to play guard. Retained Byron Murphy, 3 years, $54 million on the same free agent contract every corner in the league got this year. Jonathan Allen, 3 years, $51 million, $31 guaranteed at defensive tackle. Defensive tackle Javon Hargrave, 3 years, $30 million, $19 guaranteed. Signed Ryan Kelly to play center, 2 years, $18 million, $9 guaranteed. Tacked on a year to Andrew Van Ginkel's deal, 1 year, $23 million. Extended Josh Metellus, 3 years, $36 million, $25 guaranteed. Josh Oliver, 3 years, $23 million, $20 guaranteed. Retained Aaron Jones, 2 years, $20 million, $13.5 guaranteed. Brought in Jordan Mason via trade, 2 years, $10 million. Traded for Sam Howell, then traded him back to the Eagles for a draft pick, and then just signed Carson Wentz to back up J.J. McCarthy. In the draft, took Jonathan Jackson, offensive guard, 24th overall. Wide receiver Ty Felton in the 3rd round, 102nd overall. They didn't have many picks. While Sam Darnold, Cam Bynum, Cam Robinson, Pat Jones, Garrett Bradbury in free agency, and then just traded Harrison Phillips to the Jets. What is keeping you up at night, David, about the 2025 Minnesota Vikings?
What's keeping me up at night?
We're starting with keeping you up at night about the Vikings because I think it would be disingenuous to start anywhere else.
What's keeping me up at night about the championship level roster with a tortured fan base that drafted an extremely young quarterback, top 10, saw him get hurt, put him on the shelf for his rookie year, and is asking him to be the difference for a team that won 14 games? I don't know. What could possibly be keeping me up at night?
We all have the same answer to this.
It's J.J. McCarthy. It's J.J. McCarthy.
This is the place where we have to start this conversation because the rest of this roster, the idea that we didn't even deign to doubt what the Vikings could do this year on other shows that we've done after the last couple seasons, why people think that's ridiculous is because of the rest of the roster and the coaching staff are so unbelievably good that there is belief that this should still be like a surefire playoff team with a quarterback that we have never seen play football, Derrik. And I don't think that's crazy, but I do think that speaks to the overall quality in every other aspect of the roster and the organization heading into this season.
And to some degree, it's not theory. Obviously Sam Darnold being a veteran and being extremely talented.
We have seen it in practice.
Yeah, it's slightly different circumstances than J.J. McCarthy, sure, but we have seen them take ex-quarterback we've never really seen be good in the NFL before and be a 14-win team. We've already seen them do it. And they've retained all their play callers, which is always a huge thing. They've only improved the trenches, which I think in a lot of ways is always a way to how are we, it's a quick way to measure how good you think a team is. Just look at the trenches, and that's a good way to start. Yeah. They threw a bunch of money at both sides. They still have maybe the best receiver in football. Every other part, the other 21 positions on this team, it's just this is a team that won 14 games last year, and if the quarterback is as good as he was last year, they can do it again. It's just we have no idea because we've never seen him play, and he's coming off of a knee injury.
And I think you could make a solid argument that collectively this is a top 5 team when it comes to play calling and infrastructure on both sides of the ball, independent of the players that we're talking about. What's going to happen with J.J. McCarthy is it's going to be a constant conversation over the course of the entire season. And I was in Minnesota last week, about a week ago today. It was the last training camp stop that I made. And when you just think about the way that they've approached this and just how intentional they've been about making sure we're putting everything we can in place to guarantee that the only way this guy fails is if he's just not good enough. That is the only thing we are leaving up to chance. And that extends to how J.J. McCarthy is wired, by the way. So they left in the spring after OTAs, and he came back and just had a much better handle on a lot of the mental parts of the offense. And so they were he just spent the entire break studying details about the offense. And so his quality as a quarterback, him as a player, is what is going to hold this back. Nothing else. Even drafting Donovan Jackson in the first round, after making those moves in free agency, I think part of the thought was, well, if we take this guard, who is in the tier of players we would take here, then there's no question. We have no remaining questions about the offensive personnel. And I think the peace of mind that came with that was at least partially, Dave, why they wanted to make that happen. They're leaving nothing up to chance except for the quarterback, which unfortunately is a pretty big thing.
It's very funny that the narrative that followed JJ through his very successful career at Michigan now can follow him into the NFL. Because part of the conversation was like, Michigan was loaded. They had 14 draft picks. They won the national title. Like, he only had to throw 10 passes in a close game in the fourth quarter all year, or whatever the number was. Like, the whole point was that Michigan was so good that he didn't have to do that much. And maybe that'll be true in Minnesota too. Like, we had a whole argument about it where maybe JJ just needs to be a median NFL quarterback, and this team is really good enough to contend. I would feel a hell of a lot better. Do you know how much better I would feel about the Vikings if I knew that he had even done the Patrick Mahomes thing and sat for a year and played week 18 and looked good in one game? Like, I'd be ready to put the Vikings in the Super Bowl if I had some degree of assurance of anything, even if it was just a nonsense week 18 game and the knowledge that he got to practice all season long. But he didn't do that stuff. It speaks to how little football he has played at this level. It's fascinating. And I mean, I want it to work out because it would be really, really fun, but it's terrifying because I think the ceiling is Super Bowl contender, and obviously the floor is, oh my God, we whiffed on a top 10 draft pick and it's gonna, pardon my French, our chances of winning a Super Bowl with this amazing roster.
Especially because you moved on from a guy you knew could make you a 14-win team. Like, even if he was limited, even if you had to make concessions financially, with resource-wise, if you were to pay Sam Darnold, you still moved on from it. And I supported that in the moment, and I still do. It's funny that you say that 10 plays a game, Dave. I think that's how they're looking at it. The way that they've built this offense, I think their goal is, can we make this a situation where we need him to make 7 or 8 throws every single game, where we're making sure, because of the quality of the run game now, because of the offensive line, because of everything else about the infrastructure, we're putting him in 7 or 8 moments a game, or where he needs to really do the heavy lifting. And I think some people might look at that and think it's a bit of skepticism or doubt about the quality of the quarterback from the people building that sort of situation. I don't really take it that way. I think Kevin O'Connell specifically, his belief, like in his bones, is that you should do everything you can to make it as easy as possible on the quarterback. And I think part of that is his history as a quarterback. So I don't think that, in trying to make sure that's the environment where we only need him to make 7 or 8 plays a game. That's not the tone they're saying it with. I think the tone they're saying it with is, we only need him to make 7 or 8 plays a game. That's how we've built this thing. And so if that's true, if everything else is so good that that's the scenario you put him in, I guess the question, Derrik, is how confident do we have in his ability to make those 7 or 8 plays a game?
That's a heavy question because we haven't seen him play very much. I was pretty iffy on McCarthy as a prospect. He, to me, was more of like a guy you take in the top 50, like top of the second round, very end of the first round. And they obviously took him a little bit higher than that. But I do think, like, a lot of my issue was he was going to be someone who needed a little bit of time. He was going to be someone who needed the right environment, and he was going to need a place that didn't ask a lot of him early on. Well, the Vikings do check all of those boxes. And I do think that, like, kind of to the point that you were making about the talent being so good, that we're not going to have to ask questions about, like, okay, if he can't handle this, then he's just not good enough. I think that extends to the idea of, like, okay, well, if they only need him to make 7 plays a game, if he can't even do that, then they have a pretty good answer that it's, like, ruined immediately. I do have faith that he can at least clear that bar. The question to me, like, with McCarthy long term is, and this is more than a 2025 question, is just like, by the time you get to when you want to pay him in year 3 and year 4, what does the ceiling look like? And obviously that doesn't really matter for right now. If he can just make those 7 plays a game, which I think he can manage that. I do have some questions in the sense that, like, he's less talented than Sam Darnold was. His arm is not quite as good. He's not as big. They're probably similar athletes. Sam just didn't want to run as much as JJ McCarthy does, and I think that's just a matter of him being a zoomer and Sam not. So we'll see in that front. But I do think he can probably manage.
Let's get to what we're excited to watch with the 2025 Minnesota Vikings. We alluded to it a little bit, but my answer to this is really just a more balanced and complete version of this offense. When you look at the numbers from last year, obviously Sam Darnold was incredibly productive. This was one of the most explosive passing offenses in the NFL. The way that they construct their vertical passing game is as good as any team in professional football, and then they have the talent to make that whole thing go. Then you look at the rushing numbers and you realize where some of the cracks in this thing had started to form. They finished 26th in rushing success rate last season per next gen stats. And you felt that. You felt that in the most important moments of the year. And I think that led to down and distance situations that put more stress on the passing game. And I think that's what they're trying to avoid in the way that they've deployed their resources this offseason. So by going out, signing Will Fries, signing Ryan Kelly, drafting Donovan Jackson, and trading for Jordan Mason to kind of take some of that rushing workload specifically off of Aaron Jones, the hope here is that you're just so much more balanced that you ask less of the quarterback. And I think this extends to the rest of the offense overall and kind of how it builds on that idea. When I'm thinking about and talking to people there, and they didn't say this explicitly, but a lot of the things they were saying about just the marriage of the run and the pass being the foundation of this offense. And we kind of strayed away from that in Minnesota over the last couple of years because of the quality of the running game. I think they want to get back to a place, Derrik, where this kind of feels like the 2017, 2018 Rams version of this offensive system, where it's running the ball, it's play action, and it's even like some of the screens and play action screens that can come off of that, where you're really leaning into the deception and the breadth of the menu of what you can do on any individual play. Like this team was like 8th in success rate on screens last year per next gen, but they were middle of the pack in how often they ran them. I expect to see more screens. I expect to see more efficient runs. And so just that version of this offense where the menu is a little bit stronger and more varied, I'm looking forward to this personnel expressing those ideas.
It's funny you mentioned the 2017, 2018 Rams. As I was talking about like what I felt about McCarthy, I was like, that's kind of how I thought about Jared Goff as a prospect, actually. Obviously, McCarthy's a better athlete than Jared Goff was, but just in terms of like passers and what they were going to require heading into the NFL. So the 2017, 2018 Rams, obviously that's pie in the sky for a team like this, but they have the talent to do it. And like for me, it's a lot of, we've talked about this a little bit. For as fun as the Vikings offense was to watch last year, they weren't like that good. Because they were like a middle of the pack offense because I think we remember in our minds all the explosives. But if you actually like watch down to down, they were having to hunt for those all of the time because they couldn't run the ball and they couldn't get to these screens as much as they want. So if they can run the piss out of the ball the way that I think they are clearly built to do now, especially like if Darisaw is coming back fully healthy and stuff, I'm pretty excited for what this is going to look like. Especially too, you mentioned, I really think an underrated part of this is getting Jordan Mason. Like Aaron Jones at this stage in his career, he just can't take that many touches. Like he was never really that kind of guy. And
he never was. We were all pissed about it early in his career, but the Packers always knew that they're only supposed to give him like 200 touches a year.
Him and Tony
Pollard.
I
love Aaron Jones. He's like one of my favorite players ever, but I've come to that place where I understand the vision.
Him and Tony Pollard for the longest time were like the fantasy guys of like, just give them more touches. And it's like some guys
I was one
of
those guys. I'm not putting it on anybody else. I was one of those guys.
Some guys just can't handle it. And Jones is fantastic for the 20 touches you can get him. But when you start to creep up to 27, 28, whatever it is, you have some issues. So just getting a hammer like Jordan Mason, I really think that does go a long way, especially when, one, they needed that to begin with. But now if we're going to run the ball 5 more times a game than we did before, it's just going to go, I think, such a long way for the way that this thing can be put together.
Let's get to the swing points for the 2025 Minnesota Vikings. Dave, what do you got for me?
I'll just stay in my notes section from the Detroit Lions because I'm curious to see how they deal with 3 new guys in new places on the interior of their offensive line. And I think it's funny the way we talk about these different things. It reminds me of the meme that goes around social media where the hot guy says something to the lady at work and she's like, "Oh, aren't you so sweet?" And then the ugly guy says it and she's like, "Human resources?" That's what I feel like with the Vikings and the Lions, where they're doing the same thing.
They both have 3 new starters on the interior of the offensive line and 3 new spots.
We all feel so much better about the Vikings because of the resources they spend, obviously. I mean, Will Fries was a big money guy. Ryan Kelly, even if it was a smaller contract, he's an established starter. And then you use a first-round pick. So there's just this natural predisposition to be like, well, yeah, these guys are going to kick ass because they're expensive. And that's not necessarily true, obviously. I think it'll probably be fine, and I am excited to see Jordan Mason in particular run behind 3 guys like this. But we don't have proof of concept yet. I mean, I know Kelly and Fries played together in Indy. They should be plenty familiar with each other. They also dealt with injury last year. That's worth mentioning. Both of them had their seasons cut short. And then Donovan Jackson, I think you guys can disagree with me if you want to, but my read on Donovan Jackson is everybody's basically like, well, he's going to a good situation, and that will probably lead him to success. But I think a lot of people were like, ooh, was this a little rich for a guy of Donovan Jackson's talent? So I think that's worth having in the back of your mind at least. And I say all that to say, just because you throw a load of money and resources at a problem doesn't guarantee a fix. So I think a huge swing point for this season is, do these guys live up to the billing and what we hope they can be?
I will say about Donovan Jackson, I think that the argument for him is that he was a high floor prospect. Maybe if the ceiling is a little bit limited, he's a high floor prospect. And I do think that they had him in a tier of players where they weren't stretching to go get him. Because I think if they had run out of that tier of players where they thought there was a worthwhile pick in the 20s, they would have traded down because of the amount of picks that they needed in this draft. So I do think that I don't think they feel like they reached for Donovan Jackson just because they needed an offensive guard. We'll see what the floor of that actually looks like, because obviously he is still a rookie. We've never seen him play in the NFL. For the other two guards, this is to me a very good example, Dave, of something you've said a lot over the last couple of weeks of just because you spent a lot of money on something in free agency doesn't mean it's fixed. Will Fries, you know how many starts Will Fries has over the past 3 years, or just in his career? How many starts Will Fries has in his NFL career?
Lay it on me.
I'm going to say like 31. Oh my God.
Yes, 31. It's exactly 31.
Derek, you had it pulled up.
No, I swear. I was thinking, I was like, okay, I know he didn't start early in his career, and then he did have like a really good year, and then he was hurt for parts of last year.
He played 5 games last season. So you are basing this contract where Will Fries got $17.5 million a year with $44 million guaranteed, essentially on a 1 year of quality starting play and then 5 games last year before he got hurt. He's also coming off a broken leg. I like Will Fries. That is a very rich contract with somebody of Will Fries' profile. Ryan Kelly missed 7 games last year, 3 games the year before that, and he is about to turn 32 years old. So it's definitely better, and I feel much better about it. But this idea that this is some bulletproof situation on the interior of the Vikings offensive line, it's not that. I think there's still more volatility to how this could eventually play out than we probably want to admit, given all the resources they poured into it.
Yeah, I can agree with that. The only like minor area of hope I do have is like, I know they obviously tried to replace him this year, but like Blake Brendel played okay for them last year. So the fact that he's now depth for those two guards, I do think is a little bit nice, but I am a little bit worried if Kelly goes down again, what they're going to do there.
My swing point here is the interior on the other side of the ball. Same kind of idea, right? You signed 2 30-something defensive tackles. That's what they poured all their money into, rather than trying to spend some on the secondary, even though they had a couple holes to fill there. We can get to the thinking as to why, but Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave, you got a 30-year-old guy and a 32-year-old guy, both of whom have been banged up, and you're really banking on them changing the complexion of what your front feels like, to the point that they just traded Harrison Phillips. Like, they are really, really relying on 2 guys that they paid a lot of money to that are now third contract players into their 30s. And that comes with like a real amount of risk. And so how well those guys play and whether they justify that offseason plan, I think a lot of the quality of the defense for this Vikings team and how it could feel different than it has over the last couple of years hinges on what you get out of those guys.
Robert, you know what's really funny? Do you remember the 2 position groups that we really hemmed and hawed over last year going into the season for the Vikings? It was the interior of their offensive line and the interior of their defensive line. Granted, this time last year, it was they might be so bad, I don't know if they can be a good team. Now it's like they'll probably be fine. Can they make them a great team? So the conversation has shifted. It's just funny that we've landed in the exact same spot a year later.
But at least they addressed it.
Yeah, at least exactly.
Last year it was they haven't addressed it. We're just rolling with the same group of interior players again. I have a lot more faith in it working out this time, but how well it works out, considering what they poured into it, I think that's what we're talking about, Dave.
I hate it for Hargrave in particular because I would argue that he has been a good example of a big money free agent who has actually worked out, like signed a big deal in Philly after starting in Pittsburgh, helped spur them to a Super Bowl, turned that into a bigger deal in San Francisco, which he undoubtedly wasn't as good in San Francisco, but he helped them get to a Super Bowl. And it's like, okay, now do it again. And people are going to hate the guy if he doesn't deliver. And it's like, well, he's been delivering for a lot of his career, but you're asking a 32-year-old to play at the level that you remember from probably 2022. Obviously, that year with the Eagles where they got to the Super Bowl was his best year and his biggest breakout. I don't know how fair that is. I hate it for John Allen too, to be honest with you, because he was so good for so long on some Washington teams. Dealt with injury all last year, like didn't really get to enjoy the Commanders finally being good the way that he would probably prefer. So I mean, I'm rooting for both of these guys to deliver on the hype, but I think it is a very fair question of whether, when you say third contract, I start to get nervous, and I hope they can defy the odds there.
And that was the problem with this free agent group, is that there just weren't a lot of second contract players, and this team had a lot of money to burn in free agency. And so the guys that they went after, there was a guy coming off a broken leg, was one of the best second contract players available. And then a lot of the other guys were older players. And so there's always going to be some inherent risk there. If you look at the aging curves historically and the downside risk for paying players on third contracts, defensive linemen in general, and especially interior defensive linemen and offensive linemen, is typically a spot where you can be okay. And I think that informed some of the aggressiveness here, but that doesn't mean there's less risk than there are with younger free agents. And it really does represent a change in mindset for this team specifically, because when you look at the free agents that they've tried to sign in previous years, Jonathan Grenard's, Blake Cashman's, even like Andrew Van Ginkel was, I think, a little bit older, but you look at Byron Murphy, they've done, for the most part, in previous off seasons, they had been trying to build with free agents that were second contract players that could kind of become part of the tissue of the team because they had drafted so poorly. Now you see a mindset shift where it's like, we're trying to push this thing over the finish line now, and sometimes that can work. And sometimes that can force you to take on risk you probably shouldn't be taking on, and it becomes a little bit disappointing in the end.
And that's kind of like the last part of this I want to tack onto. Like, they, on defense, kind of over-leveraged themselves, it felt like to me, to fixing the front. And I get it because it's been the biggest issue for them for a while. But I do worry about them not throwing enough resources at the secondary. Like, I get that we like the way that Isaiah Rodgers played last year, but like, he's a capable corner too, probably. And now he's their best guy. Jeff Okudah is on his 4th team in 4 years, and he's probably going to be starting for this team. Harrison Smith is 36 years old. Like, it's just, they lost Cam Bynum, who I think was their best defensive back other than maybe Byron Murphy last year. Like, it's just felt like they let that part of the roster deteriorate in favor of signing these 2 30-plus defensive tackles who might be good for them, but it's like, does it balance out? I'm not sure.
I think that was a conscious choice. I think in their minds, if they had limited resources, who everyone does, they would rather pour the resources into the front and try to get by on the back end because they've shown an ability to do that. Like, this is a group that had Shaq Griffin and Stephon Gilmore last year and was one of the best 2 or 3 defenses in the league. Brian Flores has an extensive history as a scout, and I think he really has an eye for what sort of DBs he wants. And I think their thought was, we can get by with a little bit less at those spots. Theo Jackson has been waiting in the wings for a long time as that next up safety if we were to move on from Bynum. Theo Jackson kind of stepping into that role after having a couple strong off seasons allows us to use Josh Metellus in all the ways that we want to. And the front is going to be good and better enough when we're not blitzing that we can get by with how we have built the secondary. That's the vision. We'll see if that actually comes to fruition, but I think that's the argument for why they did it this way. Let's get to what we're watching over the first month of the season with the Minnesota Vikings. Dave, lay it on me.
Maybe you've heard the Vikings have a little bit of an issue at wide receiver right now. Jordan Addison, obviously, suspended 3 games. Justin Naylor is dealing with a hand injury. And so, shocker of shockers, by the time you're listening to this, maybe the Vikings will have traded for Adam Thielen. As of right now, it hasn't happened yet. But behind Justin Jefferson, there's a little bit of an early season crisis. Now, notice I said the phrase behind Justin Jefferson. So like, everything is still probably going to be okay. You have arguably the best receiver in football starting for you, but you do need other guys to fill out the starting lineup. You do. I mean, we play with 3 receivers more often than not in the NFL, or maybe the Vikings pivot to avoid their personnel issues at receiver. I don't know. I'm curious to see how they deal with the suspension, how they deal with the Naylor injury. It's obviously not an ideal way to start the season, but I'll take number 18 in purple and feel fine about it at the end of the day.
It feels like there's going to be a receiver in the mix here that is not currently on the Minnesota Vikings.
Oh, one way or another.
That would be my guess.
And like, it is worrisome to me, like, seeing a bunch of like every guy behind Justin Jefferson is either like not listed on our lads because they're suspended or they're hurt or they're a rookie. It's a lot of not great. I will say I have enough faith in Kevin O'Connell that they'll be able to weather it, in part because, like, I remember him making people think that KJ Osborne was really good for a minute, and I'm sure he can get that out of whoever is going to have to step up here.
Jalen Nailor's had some decent moments for the
He
Vikings.
has, dude.
And so they've been able to get by. This is going to be funny because we're recording this at 3 o'clock on Monday. I assume Adam Thielen is going to get signed by or traded for at like 5:30 p.m. Like that feels inevitable at this point, but absolutely something worth keeping an eye on. What I'm watching over the first month of the season is, what is that Brian Flores wrinkle this year?
Mm-hmm.
You know, what is the new thing that we see from this defense? And I think some of that may be expressed through the personnel. You know, the fact that they feel a little bit better about the pass rush when it comes to bringing four, not having to send extra bodies at the problem. They've always done that on third down. Like last year specifically, they really turned down the blitz knob on third down and just relied on getting home and playing just like true coverage behind it. Now, do you feel a little bit better about that overall formula because the players up front are better? This is a team, Derek, they played two-man at the highest rate in the league on third down last year. Is 14% of snaps, which was double nearly every other team in the league. And so is that kind of a signal about maybe what we'll see a little bit more of this year? Because one of the issues with the way that they've played and some of the hot pressures and what they do on early downs is that it leaves a lot of air in the coverage. And so are we going to get to a place where maybe they try to be a little bit stickier while still protecting themselves in some of those two-man looks, and they feel better about what they can do with their front four? Like that's one specific thing where like, do we see even a little bit more of that? I don't know the answer, but I know that every year, and you know, in talking to people there, this is at front of mind. It's like, what is our plan for this year compared to what it was last year? They've shown an ability to continue evolving. I'm just curious what the next step of that looks like for Flores in this group.
I am too, for a number of reasons. One, obviously, when you invest that much in the front, you expect to not have to throw so much bullshit around with the front so that they can just do their jobs. And I think that that's certainly going to be a consideration for them. I think another thing is like we saw at the tail end of last year, they started to try to play a little bit more man coverage in a bunch of different ways. And I think that was because like, for as much as I think we've gotten used to Brian Flores being this like Spagnuolo-esque, play a lot of zone, do a lot of funky stuff up front, he's a man coverage guy, like in his heart of hearts. Like that's what he was doing in Miami. It's what I think came up with in New England. Like that's what he wants to do. And so I actually think a funny thing about the personnel is like, even though I probably feel worse or at least not better about the corner room than I did at this point last year, I think sometimes when the secondary is so bad, coaches will be like, dude, just run with them. We're just going to play man coverage. And I almost wonder if because the front is going to be better, that might be where we end up with this team.
You're more worried about the secondary than I am. I do think
it scares me a little bit.
In some like high leverage moments late in the season against really good teams, are you going to be worried about those guys? Maybe. But I think they've shown an ability to get by at those positions for so long that I just trust their ability to continue doing that. And then up front, obviously, you have the two guys you signed. And then what they get out of Dallas Turner this year, I think, is really interesting as well. Like, this is a guy who didn't play much last year because they felt so good about the edge room that they already had. If you can use him, you know, bump him inside in certain pass rush situations, get three of those hedge rushers on the field, take some of the mileage off of either Hargrave or Allen over the course of the year, I'll be curious to see whether or not the horses they have up front allow them to play in a way where the secondary just matters a little bit less.
The ceiling of this pass rush, we're probably like, I don't think people talk about the ceiling of their pass rush as top of the NFL. It could be. I think the reason we don't is because it's hard to imagine Hargrave, Allen, and Dallas Turner all really, you know, hitting their ceiling in addition to, you know, the Grenards of the world, Van Ginkel also firing on all cylinders. It's hard to imagine all those pieces clicking into place, but if they do, that's really, really fun and could completely change the way I think a lot of people view the Vikings defense. Even though people already think it's good, I think that would be another level of just ability to generate pressure.
This is a fraught question, but we're going to ask it anyway. What is success for the 2025 Minnesota Vikings, Dave?
No, y'all go first because we clearly differ on this topic, and I want to react to what y'all have to say.
Derek?
This roster is too good to not win like 11 games again. Like I know the quarterback questions and all that, and we'll see what we get from him. But like the defense, even if I have some concerns with the secondary, like I would be shocked if they're anything less than a top 10 defense. And then offensively, like you have built the probably, at least on paper, what seems to be like the best offense in the league once Jordan Addison obviously comes back. So it's just like, I know the quarterback is the most important position, but at the end of the day, when you build a roster that good, you should be a 10-11 win team.
I think the supporting cast personnel-wise of the Minnesota Vikings would, or of the Philadelphia Eagles would have a pretty. They would have something to say about the best 10 other starters.
I guess we have more proof of concept there a little bit.
Just throwing that out there. I think that I would rather have Kevin O'Connell than some combination of Kevin Patullo and Nick Sirianni. But the players themselves, I think the Eagles are doing okay. I think, based on the amount of talent that they have, I think that being like a 10-win playoff team is success. I think anything less than that, even if you have modest expectations for a first-year quarterback, I think Vikings fans would be a little bit disappointed if that's how it shook out. But you're not going to that place. If they missed the playoffs, Dave, you don't think that's a disappointment for the Vikings?
Did Brock Purdy break all of our brains? Is this just can anybody step in and play quarterback to the point where if the roster's good enough, we just put them in these conversations? I mean, I get it. And I'm not trying to hate on JJ McCarthy. I'm excited to see what he can do, but I just can't get there with the idea that an unknown at quarterback won't stop you from saying this team should win 10 or 11 games like that in one of the most competitive divisions in the NFL, by the way. 14 wins didn't win you the division last year, guys.
But in what world does he look promising and they don't make the playoffs?
In a world where it's the NFL and games are decided by 6 or fewer points all the time, and you look back at the season and say, holy, if we hadn't gotten that false start, maybe we convert that third down and we win that game and we're in the playoffs instead of not. You mean to tell me if the Vikings go 8-9 and JJ McCarthy shows some flashes and they lose a couple games in heartbreaking fashion, is that a disappointing year? I mean, I guess it is, because it means JJ's not the phenom that Vikings fans hope that he is. But is that a bad season for a first-year 23-year-old quarterback if he looks promising and they win 8 games?
I think that the question here is what does promising mean? Because if he looks promising, and that means he's a middle-of-the-road NFL quarterback, let's say that is promising as a year-one starter. Given everything else, that is probably enough for them to win 10 games, given how strong everything else is. My stance on this is, based on how this team is built, and based on the resources that they've spent, and the timeline that they are on, they have to be ready to win the Super Bowl next year.
Mm-hmm.
Can JJ McCarthy be on that sort of trajectory and have them not win 10 games this year?
No. That world doesn't exist.
I have to imagine that it does. I have to imagine that it does.
Maybe
JJ,
it does.
This
Maybe
is you being the eternal
off-season step. But I think that needle is very hard to thread with those two things, where he's promising enough for you to feel really good about your 2026 chances, but you went 8-9 this year with everything else they have on that roster.
What if they go 10-7 and miss the playoffs because it was just that competitive?
That's okay.
That I can live with.
Okay.
If you get to
I think that's okay.
Yes.
I don't think they can be a sub 500 team and we believe they're making good on what this plan was supposed to be. Unless they lose, unless it's the opposite of 2 years ago and they have the worst luck on one-score game regression in the history of football.
What if JJ, I mean, this is a bad example because the Packers wound up making the playoffs that year, but what if JJ has a Jordan Love-esque rookie year, not rookie year, you know what I mean, first year as a starter.
We started talking about Jordan Love like a top 10 quarterback immediately. So then, yes, that would be success.
I also think JJ half the year to get there, though.
But they made the playoffs.
Jordan half the year to get.
So then that's
the exact trajectory that they're on. That is success.
If they do that, that's success. Yes.
Yes.
What if they don't make the playoffs? The Packers made the playoffs that year as the 7th seed. I'm just saying, it's not playoffs or bust. I guess that's my only point. There's got to be an area where JJ McCarthy has room to grow and struggle and look like a first-year starter and not be a failure if the Vikings don't make the playoffs. I can't hold him to that high of a standard. Maybe I should. Maybe I'm going easy on him.
I think that's fine. I think your original stance on this was that they could go like 8-9 and it would still be a successful season. That I cannot get on board
You
with.
can't
like
be the Cardinals last year. You can't do that.
If they're a 10-7 team that doesn't make the playoffs in a really good NFC North, and we feel very good about where the arrow is pointed, I think all of those things can be true simultaneously.
The Jordan Love Packers that made the playoffs that year were 9-8. We're
above 500. That's my only stance here. They're above 500.
So if a field goal, if a Will Reichard field goal clangs off the post and they lose one more game and go 8-9, it's all out the window. I
realize that are watching this on YouTube. You let us know if an 8-9 season is successful for you. You let us know. You let us know in the comments below whether you'll be happy with an 8-9 season, whether that is success in your minds.
It's such a mind to try to project what a guy that we've never seen is going to do on a team this good. I guess I can't hold him to that high of a standard, but I mean, he was the top 10 pick. Maybe that's on me. Maybe I should.
Thanks for watching The Athletic Football Show. Subscribe to the channel to keep up with us. Like and comment on this video, and we'll see you next time.